Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Iman Hadwe, Quadra 2, Intervention Manager.
Okay, صباح الخير زملائنا شركائنا الأعزاء. Good morning, partners and colleagues. Welcome to the second session of the work-based learning webinars. Second session is all about learning from experience. We have very interesting presenters today, very qualified presenters to show us what they did with the work-based learning. If you'd like to listen in Arabic, please click the button below that says interpretation. And نفس الشيء كمان إذا باللغة العربية and you'd like to listen in English, please click interpretation and choose the language that you would like to listen in for. So I hope you are all safe and healthy during this very challenging circumstances that we are passing through today. These circumstances actually adds more emphasis on the importance of the VET sector in creating jobs, finding alternatives for those who lost jobs during COVID-19 pandemic area. We also, since our project works with youth, we also believe that youth should not really be a burden on economy. Instead, it should provide an opportunity for economy to grow and to overcome these difficult circumstances. We heard great presentations from Dr. Burhan from UNESCO last time, as well as Mr. Didier from ETF, very inspiring towards how we need to be very creative during these circumstances and look for other options to really survive and help mitigate the consequences that we are facing and we will still face during this hard time. So I will turn on to presenting who we have today. So we have 3 speakers today. Mr. Thaer Shreide, who is the Chief Technical Advisor, Coordinator for ILO. Ms. Haneen Abu Nahle, who is the Gaza Intervention Officer from Enable Palestine, working on the Skilled Young Palestine project. And we also have Mr. Stefan Thomas, who is a specialist in VET policies and systems from the European Training Foundation. These 3 very knowledgeable speakers will provide us with their experience on work-based learning and what they have done, so we could learn from them and design our programs in the best way possible. So without any further delay, we will move to Mr. Thaer Shreide. Mr. Thaer Shreide, again, is the Chief Technical Advisor and Coordinator for ILO. He has more than 25 years of experience working with international NGOs. He managed and supported a diversified portfolio of development programs, joined UNDP in Iraq in 2009, served on several positions as Program Manager, Head of Southern Hub Office, as well as Deputy Country Director for Operations. He joined ILO in 2019 to coordinate the response to the Syrian crisis in Jordan through advocacy and direct programming for decent work and employment. We look forward for your presentation, Mr. Thaer. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Thaer Shreide, ILO, Chief Technical Advisor, Coordinator.
Good morning, everyone. صباح الخير للجميع. First, I hope everyone is healthy and safe. And I would like to thank Enable, Ms. Iman, and Dr. Zaid for this invitation, which I find it a very good opportunity for exchanging knowledge and coordinate better activities for our common goal. I would like to talk first, about the background of our experience, especially related to work-based learning. Before that, just to give you an idea about the ILO's program of support that I'm coordinating for the crisis response, which this experience is under that umbrella. The program support for crisis response under ILO works within the ILO's tripartite relationship between working with the government, the employers, and the employees. And this ecosystem or comprehensive program for responding to the crisis, especially for the Syrian crisis, deals with building capacities, certifying skills, developing skills towards supporting employment within a decent work environment. And this is where this program has several projects that deals with several objectives towards the slogan of ILO, which it is decent work and social justice. I just wanted to give you the background that our interventions with or related to work-based learning is within a bigger program of support to the crisis response. And I will shift now to speak in Arabic to tell you about our experience because I believe or I hope that our audience mostly are Jordanians, so it might be better to utilize my native language. صباح الخير مجددا. احنا بس اليوم يعني لنا الشرف ان نحكي عن تجربتنا بالاعتراف بالخبرات والتعلم المسبق اللي هو بالذات كان يعني له علاقه بالwork based learning. بخلال هاي البرزنتيشن راح نتعرف على مفهوم الاعتراف بالخبرات والتعلم السابق، وسواء نعرف هذا المفهوم سواء من المنظور الدولي أو من المنظور الأردني، ونشوف شو هي مزاياه وكيف إحنا طبقناه في ILO، وشو هي أهدافنا من هذا التطبيق لاعتراف بالخبرات السابقة بالنسبة لبرامجنا في الأردن. وإن شاء الله كمان راح نتعرف على الشركاء وطريقة عملنا وإيش هي الأرقام أو الإنجازات اللي إحنا حققناها في هذا المجال. إحنا عم نشتغل بهذا الموضوع من 2016 اللي هو برنامجنا للاستجابة للأزمات، وجزء من اهتماماتنا كان الاعتراف بالخبرات السابقة. إذا بدنا نطلع على المفهوم الاعتراف بالتعلم المسبق اللي احنا بنسميه Recognition of Prior Learning أو RPL، وفي له تسمية أخرى اللي هو Prior Learning Assessment، بس احنا بنستعمل ال RPL كمصطلح اللي هي العملية التي تستعملها الجهات الفاحصة والمانحة للمؤهلات اللي المكتسبة من خلال العمل خارج الفصل الدراسي، طبعا بغرض الحصول على مؤهل أو إجازة لمزاولة هذه المهنة. وطبعا هناك عدة طرق لهذا المفهوم، منها التدريب في الشركات أو عن طريق الخبرة المكتسبة من العمل أو الأنشطة المدنية أو التعلم الذاتي. لكن بما أنه إحنا برامجنا كانت أغلبيتها في التدريب في الشركات، هنا ربطناها بالwork based learning أو التدريب المربوط بالعمل. الاعتراف بالتعليم والخبرات السابقة كمفهوم دولي إنه هي عملية يعني محصلة لجميع أشكال المعرفة والمهارات والكفايات اللي بيكتسبها الفرد خارج بيئة التعلم الرسمي. وبتتم طبعا عملية التقييم بناء على معايير ومخرجات لهذا التعلم، واللي بيطلع أو بينجح بهذا يعني المخرجات بيكون هو مؤهل لاعتماده على هذا المؤهل أو اللي استهدفناه. وهذا تقريبا يتطابق مع مفهوم الأردني للاعتراف بالتعلم والخبرات السابقة، حيث أنه هو حسب قانون هيئة وتنمية تطوير المهارات المهنية المؤسسة منذ فترة قريبة، يقول بأنه هو الاعتراف بالتعلم السابق هو العملية التي بيتم من خلالها التعرف على التعلم السابق والتحقق منه وفحصه أو تقييمه، والاعتراف به كمؤهل بما يمكن الأفراد البناء عليه والاعتراف به لغايات الاستمرار في التعلم. فلاحظوا أن المفهوم الأردني بدل على أنه الغاية من هذه العملية أن نعترف بالخبرة أو المؤهل لهذه المهنة والاستمرار في التعلم، بحيث أنه يعرف وين المستوى اللي هو موجود فيه ويبني عليه لأنه يستمر بالتعلم. والمزايا طبعا عملية الاعتراف بالخبرات السابقة أنه بيسهل بالذات العمال أو المتدربين بالذات غير التقليديين اللي أكاديميا الاعتراف بالمؤهل بيكون سهل، فهم بيكونوا بالعادة غير تقليديين بحيث أنهم يحصلوا على مؤهلات معترف بها مثل الأكاديميين ما بيحصلوا على مؤهلات واضحة ومعترف بها. فبالتالي هو دائما يعترف بقيمة التعلم اللي هي خارج النطاق الرسمي، خارج المؤسسات الأكاديمية، اللي بتضفي الشرعية على ما بتعلمه العامل أو المتدرب بأنفسهم، وبيعطيهم فرصة أنهم يتقدموا في مستوياتهم المهنية. طبعا أيضا يعمل على استخدام الموارد طبعا بطريقة أفضل، لأن الناس اللي
program allows
وصلوا إلى
utilizing
مرحلة
resources
من
in a
المعرفة
better
ومن
way because
المهارة
people
مش
when they attain
بحاجة
a certain
إنهم
skill or
يعيدوا الكرة
knowledge
مرة أخرى
they do
ويتدربوا
not
مرة أخرى،
need
فهذا
to go
بيعطيهم
through the formal
اعتراف بالمستوى
learning
الذي هم
system.
فيه
So
بحيث
this
إنهم ما
acknowledgement
يتكرر
would acknowledge this certain level
تدريبهم على
and
نفس
allow them
المهارة
not to
اللي هي
repeat or start
أصلا
from
يمتلكونها.
zero again. It's
وطبعا
building
بيعزز
on the skills and knowledge they have.
من تصور العامل
It
أو
also
المتدرب
enhances
فهمهم للعملية التعليمية بأنها هي عملية مستمرة، وبإمكان الإنسان إنه يستمر في التعلم
process and you can continue
ويبني
learning
على
and you
المهارات اللي
can
هو
build
بيكتسبها
upon the skills
وبوقت
you
أصلا
have
أقل إذا كان في
in
اعترافات
less
بالمستويات
time, especially
المتوفرة من
if
المهارة
the
لدى
prior learning
الأشخاص.
and skill is recognized.
فالاعتراف بالخبرات والتعلم
So
السابق من منظور
acknowledging
منظمة
prior
العمل
learning
الدولي
from the perspectives of ILO,
وبالذات من
especially
خلال برنامج دعم خطة الاستجابة الأردنية
through
للأزمة السورية، يعني هو في
response to
الواقع
the Syrian
مجموعة
crisis
من
is
الخطوات
in fact
والإجراءات
a number
ضمن
of steps
التشريعات
and measures that are
الأردنية
within
بتركز
the
على
Jordanian
سياسة الاعتراف
legislation system,
بالتعلم والخبرات
and it
المسبقة من
focuses
خلال
on the
تقييم
RPL through assessing
المهارات
the
الفنية
skills,
التي
the
بيمتلكها
technical
هؤلاء
skills
الأشخاص
that
والتحقق
are
منها
acquired by these
وفحصها
persons,
بحيث أنه يأهلهم
verify, check, and then
لممارسة
qualify
أعمالهم
them
في سوق
to
العمل.
proceed with
فإحنا
their
هدفنا هي فعلا
learning or
من خلال
work or
الشعار
engagement in the
تبعنا
labor
أن
market. So our
نسهل عملية
main
فرص
objective
عمل
is to
لائقة
facilitate
للجميع بحيث
creating
أنهم
decent
يدخلوا
jobs
سوق
for
العمل
everyone.
بطريقة
So
أفضل
when they
وأقوى
enter the labor
إذا كان
market, they enter it in a stronger manner when they have this RP permit.
طبعا الهدف تبعنا
Of course, the objective, our objective of this program was basically to offer Syrian and Jordanian labor a license or work permit to allow them continue or work in a legal manner and obtain a decent job in the Jordanian market. We have a specific or detailed objectives in this area to increase the opportunities to get the work permit, to increase opportunities, whether locally or regionally, to increase the beneficiaries of our programs to be able to work and advance, to document their technical skills, to acknowledge such skills based on the assessment of vocational training corporation. Since we are talking about a program that is related to the Syrian crisis in particular, which is empowering the Syrian labor to obtain work permits and to find jobs, whether in Jordan or any or just a skill that they can benefit from when they return to their country, or if they decide to migrate, they will have an official certificate or work permit that acknowledges their prior learning. This will help them to obtain a job in any country if they decide to migrate or return home. Our reference in this program is to see what are the guidelines for assessing the qualifications and to offer work permit. We work with the Skills Development Commission in Jordan and with VTC to do the testing and the assessment. After that, we enter into an agreement, cooperation agreement with ILO, with the concerned institution to acknowledge the skills or the prior learnings. We always go back, of course, or our main foundation, our reference for this is the funding agreement to make sure that it is responding, that our work is responding or in line to the programs that ILO funds. In this area of RPL, our main partners are, in addition to the Ministry of Labor, our main partner, the Vocational Training Corporation, the National Company for Employment and Training. These are our main partners who have been engaged with us from 2016 till now in implementing our programs to acknowledge prior learnings. So if we talk about the map of or the mapping the process that we implement in our RPL programs, just to clarify or maybe simplify the process, we always we normally prepare a concept note or a memorandum of understanding related to RPL. We revise all the agreements with the assessing or certifying commission and other governmental institutions. So the assessing commission should have an agreement with a service provider that is also recognized or certified. So we look at this agreement and to make sure that this entity or commission is capable or qualified to assess such learnings and skills and ensure that learners can benefit. We provide them after making sure that they are be assigned institutions. We will give them our objectives, our figures, the percentages that we wish to achieve, whether in sectors or if it's gender sensitive, in any specific governorate. So we try to find out the potentials and the competencies of these commissions, whether they can help us achieve our targets and figures. We do that through reviewing the performance records that are normally submitted by the implementing agency. We look at the records, the persons who have been assessed, if they have passed, if they are accredited or not. This is normally done through special committees that we also evaluate, assess, and follow up. We analyze the information and the data to make sure that this is going towards achieving our main objectives reflected in our programs. So what is important in this process, that we identify the assessing partner who will make sure that all legal papers or documents are there to confirm that they are able to do the assessment. We verify and confirm which sectors are of higher priority, the percentages. Then we analyze the findings to come up with better results. This has enabled us from 2016 till now to achieve a lot in this area, especially more than 10,000 persons have benefited from our program. We have managed to secure work permits to these beneficiaries based on the assessment of their prior learnings. We have created job opportunities for more than 10,000 beneficiaries, 70% Jordanians, 30% Syrians, and thank God we have achieved excellent results. From that, 45% were females and 55 were males. 10,000 beneficiaries, we gave them an opportunity to find a better job or to continue or improve and develop with their current jobs, because now they have a better and an accredited assessment or certificate. We are happy with this achievement, and I hope that during the coming 2 years we will achieve even more than these numbers. The sectors targeted were basically the construction and professions related to that, manufacturing, industries, and the service sector. Our assessment at the semi-skilled and the skilled or the professional laborers, we carried assessment to these different levels. متوسط المهارة. I hope I have managed to give you an idea or some briefing on our experience in this limited time, and if you have any questions, I'm here to respond. Thank you very much. I thank you for your invitation.
شكرا كثير أخ سيد طائر على البرزنتيشن الغنية فعلا، وطرح خبرتكم بالRPL ومقارنتها كمان بالورك بيس ليرنينج. فعلا خبرة حلوة وعمل جدا جميل، وبعتقد بيطرح أو بيخلينا نفكر أكثر في ما بين يعني الفروقات أو كمان التشابه ما بين WBL والRPL. طبعا الأسئلة رح نخليها لنهاية الجلسة، ناخذ الأسئلة مع بعض.
We will read the questions at the end of the session, and now we will move to حنين أبو نحلة. حنين أبو نحلة will present their experience in Palestine and adopting the work-based learning. حنين has more than 5 years of experience in the vocational training and work with NGOs and international NGOs. She has also an experience in HR, designing programs that respond to the market needs and in building
the private sector umbrellas.
Working with private sector and under their umbrella. حنين have introduced the WBL concept in Palestine with the vocational training institution and corporations. She will she also guides or works with the Gaza office with aiming under the project Skilled Youth Palestine. حنين.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Haneen Abu Nahla, Enable Palestine, Giza Intervention Officer.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Iman, for the introduction. And also, I would like to thank all of Qudra team project for giving us this opportunity to give you like an overview about our experience in work-based learning in Palestine. In the presentation, we would like to focus on giving like an overview about the TVET in Palestine. Then we'll go through the work-based learning experience. We'll give like a short brief about the WBL approach and the capacity building we have conducted at policy level to introduce this approach, and also to give like an overview about how we also build the capacity to local level, and about the work-based learning training, how we make like involvement for the private sector, the sustainability of the work-based learning, and the key recommendations, and what is next. I don't know if you can see my screen. I'm not sure. Okay. Okay, great. First of all, I would like to give like an overall about TVET in Palestine. As you know, as TVET in Palestine is facing familiar problems like other TVET sector in the region. First of all, we have like low attractiveness of TVET, and also we have low enrollment rates towards TVET. We are talking about only 2% of youth enrolled in TVET. Only 0.6% of them are females. Also, we have problems related to gender stereotypes, which means that we have only traditional occupations that are provided for females in Palestine. And also, TVET in Palestine is facing a lack of funding. This is about the familiar problems. When we are talking about the investment towards TVET, it's very limited. Most of the investments are focusing mainly on the education sector. The main providers of TVET in Palestine are either public or private sector. The licensing is provided by the Ministry of Labor and the Ministry of Education and Higher Education. If we are talking about the core providers, as I have just mentioned, we have the private or public providers. For the total numbers, we are talking about more than 13,000 of students are enrolled in TVET in West Bank, and about 12,000 students in the Gaza Strip, as you can see in the table, and the breakdown of those numbers are described in the table presented in front of you. For the TVET structure or TVET governance in Palestine, actually at the beginning, the TVET was governed by what is named the Higher Council, which was mainly managed by Ministry of Education and Ministry of Labor. Recently, there is a change in the structure of TVET by establishing what is named TVET Commission, which is managed by mainly the Ministry of Labor, because the system in Palestine became convinced more that the Ministry of Labor should take the lead upon this important sector. Although this decision has been made, but still there is underfunding for Ministry of Labor institutions, the vocational training centers, because the VTCs are mainly focusing on the informal TVET. And actually this challenge was very attractive for Enable to start our intervention in the TVET sector, focusing on the informal training by focusing more on the shorter training courses and the informal trainings, and introducing the work-based learning scheme in Palestine. If we'd like to talk about Enable experience in introducing the work-based learning in Palestine, it started actually by implementing a project named Enhancing Capacities of Institutional Building. It was a 5-year project funded by the Belgian government and aiming at reducing youth unemployment. Under this project, we introduced the work-based learning approach, which means that we need to ensure that young people are equipped with the skills relevant to the labor market, in which part of the training is conducted in the TVET institution and part of it in the private sector workshops and companies, which give the opportunity of the young people to do the real work during the training. During the ECIB, we implemented several activities, starting from capacity building at policy level, capacity building at local level, and here we are talking about 2 levels or 2 targets, TVET institutions and companies. And after that, we implemented many work-based learning training initiatives in order to increase the access of vulnerable groups and also covering scholarships for young people. The details will come in the upcoming slides. When we are talking about the work-based learning approach, actually the beginning was by starting a social dialogue between the private sector and TVET providers, the demand and supply side, which actually give the private sector more involved in the training process within TVET institutions by conducting and implementing demand-driven training. And also, we made part of the training within the TVET institution and part of it within the private sector companies, which is the workplace-based training. In parallel, and it was very important to work on work-based learning manual, which means that we'd like to focus on the mentors within the private sector and within the TVET institutions to give them the best practices and how we'll be able to implement this important scheme. Within this manual, we also provide the best tools and the practices how we can adopt this work-based learning approach. This manual has been widely tested and piloted and finally disseminated at ministry level and institutional level. And of course, we can provide you with this manual after the webinar. When we are talking about work-based learning and how it has been disseminated at policy level, actually, it was the process started by involvement the representatives from both ministries, the Ministry of Labor and Ministry of Education, and also the private sector and the local employment and TVET providers and other key players in TVET, that it is very important to have like a work-based learning strategy that gives the framework for this important scheme. The strategy consisted of 5 main pillars. started from community awareness to financing, partnership, equality, sustainability, and efficiency, and the legal framework. And for the financing, we worked with all stakeholders about how we can ensure the continuous and the continuity of the work-based learning financing scheme. And one of the main topics have been recommended the idea of the skills development fund. When we are talking about the capacity building at local level, actually during the project, Enable has implemented more than 80 work-based learning initiatives, and here we are talking about longer training initiatives, more than 1 year. And also we implemented 40 initiatives, continuous vocational education and training initiatives, which is shorter training courses. We are talking about more than 28 VTCs has been involved in the process, and the shorter training courses and the longer training courses. When we are talking about the capacity building at local level, we are talking here mainly upon the individuals and the institutions themselves. Actually, we have trained the staff of more than 48 institutions upon the best practices of work-based learning and how they will be capable to implement this important approach. And also, we have trained the craftsperson who are working within the companies to be able to coach and mentor the trainees inside the workshops and the companies. If I would like to give you like an overview about the, let's say, the key data, we talked about more than €1 million has been spent to cover the work-based learning fund, which is the longer training courses. We are talking about about €200,000 for the shorter training courses. We covered the scholarships for vulnerable groups, and we are talking about scholarships here. We are talking about covering the transportation fees, meals, some incentives, in addition to toolkits. In total, we talked about more than 3,000 trainees have good benefit from the scholarship fund and the trainings. For the vocations, actually, we tried to focus on more updated vocations, not the traditional ones. For example, we talked about some new vocations like solar panels, about also some green initiatives in both areas, Gaza and West Bank. We considered the environmental aspects. Some initiatives also has focused on the environmental aspects in addition to integration the environmental aspects within the curricula itself. For the trainees, as I have just mentioned, we trained more than 3,000 trainees. Most of them were vulnerable youth from vulnerable areas in Gaza Strip and West Bank and the East Jerusalem. For the feedback and the impression and the experience with the private sector and how they saw their experience within the work-based learning, actually, we say that according to the chart you can see in front of you, that most of the private sector who got involved in the work-based learning scheme, they see it as a very positive for work-based learning approach, and they found it like very positive that they can enhance also the employability of young people, especially that those trainees met their expectations and their needs. When we are talking about the sustainability actually of the work-based learning, as you can see in this chart, most of the TVET institutions willing to continue in the work-based learning approach. For the sustainability also of TVET, after the end of the project, Enable has conducted like a tracer study for the trainees who were involved in the training. The result says that in the Gaza Strip, we are talking about more than 30% of the trainees found sustainable employment. And in the West Bank, we are talking about almost 60% of the trainees found sustainable job opportunities. For the recommendations and after the end of the project, several recommendations have been raised on a national level and an institutional level. For the national level, actually, the private sector, it was very important to engage the private sector and involve the private sector in TVET more and more. And also, it is very important to have like a consistent governmental structure for TVET, because actually, when we're talking about legal aspects, it's very important to have this governmental structure to support the more dissemination of work-based learning approach in Palestine. For institutional level, key recommendations have been raised to focus more on the labor market demand, and also to have more inclusion for vulnerable trainees, focusing on females. Also to continue investing in the private sector involvement, and also to support employment and entrepreneurship. After the excellent experience we had within the Enhancing Capacity of Institutional Building project, Enable decided to continue in this important scheme, focusing more on the involvement of the private sector and to ensure the sustainability of the work-based learning by introducing the concept of the Skills Development Fund and having the Ministry of Labor a strategic partner by introducing and starting a new project named like Skilled Young Palestine project, which has already started this year and will focus more on the sustainability of fund for the work-based learning and to ensure that the private sector will be capable and responsible towards enhancing the resilience of young people and enhancing the employability of young people in Palestine in partnership with TVET providers. Thank you, and looking forward for your questions. And we in Enable are more than welcome to share with you the work-based learning strategy and work-based learning manuals and all other relevant documents. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Haneen, for sharing your rich experience and for your willingness to share your resources. We are definitely relying and integrating a lot of your expertise and your models within our upcoming project. I think this is a great demonstration of how WBL works in a regional country, and we hope to be able to benefit further from your experience and build on it. Once again, we'll take the questions at the end. If I can remind those who are interested to send questions to make a note of their organization, their name as well as their organization, if possible. So we are taking your questions in, and we will be addressing them at the end of the session, as we mentioned earlier. So now let me welcome our third presenter for session number 3, presented by Stephen Thomas. Mr. Stephen Thomas is a specialist in VET policies and systems at the European Training Foundation. Mr. Stephen has a double master's, with one of them specialized in economics and vocational education and training. He has worked as a senior advisor and project manager for GIZ, as well as a consultant for various international organizations, including ILO and UNESCO. He has more than 10 years of experience in teaching, vocational assessment, and educational planning. Currently, once again, Mr. Stephen is the specialist in VET policies and systems at the European Training Foundation. Welcome, Mr. Stephen, and I'll give you the floor to start your presentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Stephen Thomas, ETF, specialist in VET policies and systems.
Thank you very much for the very warm welcome, and good morning, everybody. Thank you also on behalf of the European Training Foundation for giving us the opportunity, giving me the opportunity to speak to you this morning on this important topic. For those of you who are not familiar with the European Training Foundation, we are an agency of the European Union based in Italy, in Torino. We don't have, let's say, field offices, country offices, but we have country coordinators, and our coordinator is also here with us today, is Sabina Nari. And we have a long experience in working with the authorities and diversity of stakeholders in Jordan. Today, this morning, I want to talk to you about work-based learning, and I will focus on two aspects. I will focus on governance and then also on financing, as the organizers of this event have asked me to, let's say, stress on those two aspects. As you can see from this chart, there is no single model of work-based learning, and that also makes it a little bit difficult to talk about good practices or even best practices. Differences in work-based learning models or programs reflect skills levels. We can see that also clearly in the model that is now planned for Jordan. It is focusing on the semi-skilled level, but models are also reflecting needs of the economy, of the learner. Here we are talking about a specific target group. It is also reflecting culture, traditions in the country, and institutional arrangements. So I'm always a little bit, and I think I share that with most of my colleagues, I'm a little bit cautious with promoting a best practice or a specific model that can be found in one specific country. We always need to see the contextual factors, what can already be found in a given country. What is clear in the case of this specific program in Jordan is that it has a place in the entire system. I learned that when I talked with Qudra colleagues before. It is closely linked to the TVET system in Jordan. I've learned that there will be pathways to other programs, and that is definitely a good thing. So when you look at the first critical success factor, which we call place of apprenticeship in the TVET system or place of a work-based learning program, that is already there. But this morning, I will not be able to talk about all the 10 success factors. As I mentioned before, I will focus on governance. That will be my first part, and then I will also talk a little bit about financing and cost-sharing mechanisms in work-based learning. What we, let's say, what we know from international experience, that there are key features that make work-based learning programs or systems successful. And one of them is definitely a strong link between education and employment. That was also mentioned by Mrs. Nakhla. It was also mentioned by Mr. Shrade, the speakers that were before me. So we're talking about the link between the education system and the employment system that is key for any work-based learning program or any work-based learning system. To have such a link between education and training and on one side, and on the other side, the employment system, companies, associations of companies, sector committees, and so on and so forth, is key in all phases of what my colleague from Switzerland, Mrs. Reynolds, calls the curriculum value chain, or you could also say the program value chain. We're talking about 3 different phases. There's the first phase where the program is designed. There's the second phase where the program will be implemented, and then there is a third phase, what we call the feedback phase, when employers can give feedback how the program was actually performing. So in all of the 3 phases, it's crucial that the employment sector or the employment system and the education and training system work together, have a strong link. Now let's look maybe at the application phase or the implementation phase. The next slide, please. And I would like to give you one example about what needs to be regulated. And I chose the following example. Somebody in such a system, or when it comes to such a program, like also the one you plan, somebody needs to check the company's capability, willingness, and resources to train students. Usually there's also an accreditation process, but not always. And when I talk from my experience now, you see, I gave the example of 3 countries I work in, Montenegro, Serbia, and Albania. All of those countries can be found in the Western Balkan, and they do it differently. This task is carried out in Montenegro by the National VET Agency. In Serbia, it's carried out by the Chamber. And in Albania, it's carried out by the schools or training centers. So you can see those 3 countries, and these are just 3 examples, take different approaches. And we cannot say one is better than the other, but there are specific reasons for that. There are also other options, like this task, checking, accrediting the companies, could also be done by sectoral organization. It could be done by the municipality. It could be done by a ministry department, in the Ministry of Labor, or in the Ministry of Education, or in the ministry that is in general responsible for TVET. So you see, this is also an example that illustrates why it is kind of difficult to talk about best practices. What is more important, and we could see that on the next slide, is that we need to answer some questions when we are planning new programs or a new model of work-based learning in a country, because usually we're not starting from the scratch. And that is also the case in Jordan, where we already have, for example, a program for craftsmen, a 2-year program that also includes quite a substantial component of work-based learning. So the questions we need to answer is which institutions are already in place in Jordan that could carry out tasks also related to the new program for refugees and disadvantaged youth in Jordan. Which institutions are willing to do what in Jordan? It's not only that they need to be there, they also need to be motivated and willing to take over responsibility. Then always think about what can be done jointly between different institutions from the 2, let's say, the 2 systems, the education system and the employment system. What can be done jointly, for instance, by a school and by a company? Which resources are needed and what is really feasible? When you introduce a new program, is it really feasible to establish a new institution, or can you use existing institutions? That is an important question, and always important to remember. The link between education and employment is key when you pick the institutions that will be responsible for carrying out those tasks. On the next 3 slides, you find more examples of tasks that need to be done before, during, and after work-based learning. And when you in Jordan, with the program, with all the staff that works with the Qudra program, when you go through these tasks, that might be an exercise to see already, to identify institutions that could do Some of these tasks, some other tasks, may be jointly with other institutions. So you could discuss that and then find already solutions. As I mentioned before, these are tasks that are related to the application phase. They're not related to the design phase of the program and not related to the feedback phase. You see tasks like, for example, matching students with employers. Who is doing that? Is that done by a chamber, like in many countries? Is that done by the center? Is that done by a business association? Or think about checking whether companies meet occupational health and safety requirements. Also, that can be done by a range of institutions and stakeholders. And again, you can look which institutions are already there, which institutions are willing to take over responsibilities, and what can be done jointly, which resources are needed. So I won't go through all of those tasks, but I structured them along, let's say, what needs to be done before, during, and after work-based learning. After work-based learning, maybe one example, there's assessment of what students have learned at work. Assessment is always crucial. We learned from the example of Palestine, how they do it. And also there are different options, and you need to opt for, let's say, for an approach that is feasible and that does work in the country. Now I want to finish with this first part, talking about governance, roles and responsibilities of different institutions, and I want to focus a little bit now on financing, how that can be done. It's one. Next slide, please. Next one. Next one. It's another of the 10 critical success factors for work-based learning, financing and cost-sharing mechanisms. And maybe let's look at costs first. Next slide, please. Here you can see, and that will also be the case with the new program in Jordan, we usually have, when we talk about VET programs, we have a work-based learning component, and that component, I learned, will be around 50% in this new program, and we have a school or center-based learning component. And there are different costs associated to the different components. So we are talking, when we look at the work-based learning component, we're talking about the cost for the in-company trainer. He spends time on instructing the learners. Those trainers need to be also trained. They need professional development from time to time. That is also a cost factor, a cost element. Then, of course, in the companies, you use equipment, you use facilities, you use consumables for instructing the learners. In some cases, the learners have a wage, or they receive an allowance. That's also a cost. They need to be insured, health insurance, accident insurance, and also usually they need transport from the school to the company or from home to the company. And that also needs to be covered. So these decisions need to be taken. Who is covering what in that case? On the other hand, when we talk about work-based learning programs, there are also potential benefits for employers. So they don't have only costs, but usually also some benefits. That's the next slide, please. And we can make a distinction between, let's say, benefits that occur during work-based learning, like, for example, productive work of a learner, and then also benefits during and after work-based learning. I will come to that a little bit later. Let's maybe look at productive work. I don't expect much let's say, productive work in this specific program that you have planned, because the curriculum time for work-based learning is relatively short, and we cannot expect the learner to become really productive. However, he or she can probably take over some unskilled tasks, and that is also already a contribution. But to be fair, we can with such a short program of only 6 months and 50% of it carried out at the workplace, we cannot really expect a lot of productive work. But what we can expect, and here I'm pointing to the savings and other benefits on the right side of the chart, that the country has some benefits in the way that it gets to know the learner. It might be a potential new employee. The company might save some costs when it comes to recruitment. Also, the learner is already familiar with the company. The learner might know clients, colleagues, and so on. These are all benefits that are important after, or that come into play after the program. There are also other benefits. The learner might acquire company and job-specific skills. There's a reduced risk of mismatch because you know this person already. So there are definitely also in a short program, there are some, let's say, benefits in the form of savings and other benefits. Next slide, please. So when we look again about those two, let's say, those two features, the cross costs and the learner's productive work, there are probably in the case of this short program that you plan for Jordan, for disadvantaged youth and refugees, there are probably net costs for the company. And to balance the costs and benefits for companies, there are different options. 2 slides further, please. One more. And so for example, for the government, it might be an option to introduce an incentive to make work-based learning more attractive for the companies, because they cannot gain direct benefits in the form of productive work, for example, which is the case in apprenticeship programs that, for example, last for 2 years or 3 years or even longer, like in some classical apprenticeship countries like Switzerland, Denmark, or Germany, which is not the case here with such a short program. We can make a distinction in general between financial incentives and non-financial incentives. Next slide, please. There are different types of financial incentives, like tax incentives, subsidies, or levy fund schemes. An example for a subsidy, for example, could be that the wage, if the learner gets a wage or an allowance, that this is subsidized by the government. It's not paid by the company. We have that, for example, in Montenegro, one of our partner countries, where the government is subsidizing the wage or the allowance of the learner in the first 2 years, and then the companies pay the wage in the last year, in the 3rd year. So these are options. Next slide, please. Financial incentives can also be differentiated between universal incentives. For example, in the case of this program in Jordan, you could give incentives to all Jordanian companies. They would all be eligible, or the incentives would depend, and here we're talking about targeted incentives. The incentives would depend, e.g., for instance, on the size of the company, on the economic sector or a region. That is also possible. So both options are possible. Then last but not least, not to forget non-financial incentives. I'm always a little bit careful with financial incentives. A lot can be done. Next slide, please. A lot can be done to optimize the design of work-based learning schemes or programs. So after the introduction, maybe after a while, you might look at the program, discuss the program with employers. Are they happy? Are they satisfied? You might need to adjust the curriculum time that is dedicated on work-based learning, or maybe even reduce it. It depends. There are different options also to improve training capacities within companies. You can help them. You can support cooperation of companies. That is also a non-financial incentive. An institution could help with that. You can help with managerial and administrative tasks. Very often the paperwork is a heavy burden, especially for smaller companies. And even an institution, for example, a chamber, a business association, or even the school or center could help with administrative tasks. That could also help a lot to make such a program more attractive for companies. Okay, with that, I would like to finish. I would like to thank you very much for listening, and I hope it was a little bit helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan. It was actually very helpful, very resourceful. I think the questions you are raising are questions that we are looking at right now, and I think listing them in such a comprehensive and precise way helps a lot, in fact. We have lots of questions coming up, so I'd like to move to the question and answer session. Please welcome our speakers again. Thank you again for your insightful presentations. They were very helpful. So we have a few questions, and I'll move ahead with the first one. So the first question is addressed to Mr. Thaer on the RPL model and whether it can include non-vocational sectors. The question comes from Wasan, and I think she's referring to TOT recognition, interpersonal skills, or startup trainings. And we are wondering whether you have any information on that and whether RPL can be used in areas other than TVET sector or vocational sector.
Thank you, Iman, and thank you, Wasan, for the question. And that actually, this is touching actually on a bigger picture. I believe the world now is heading towards competencies, identifying competencies, and the RPL is yes. I mean, it should go beyond even the vocational sector. It can go to the higher education because the idea of RPL is behind identifying competencies, identifying the skills that a person has. And in ILO, actually, we have this interest, we have this plan to involve more even in the recognition or the certification of the skills that related to higher education. Currently, actually, because our funding is concentrating more on the Syrian crisis, it made us direct our resources and attention to vocational professions for skilled and non-skilled, but definitely it can include bigger scope than vocational. Also, actually, I mean, I don't know how much or how many other questions we have, but maybe during the session, before we know that our time is up, I would like to touch base about how we should look at work-based learning especially building up on what Stefan and Haneen said earlier, but it would be related to this. The work-based learning is bigger than only the vocational. It can include other levels, even including academic ones. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Thaer. And I think the second question is also for you, so get ready. So the next question is from Mrs. Nermin Abidat, the Chief of Party for USAID Youth Power Project. And she's asking whether we can apply this program or process on youth who completed learning programs under a USAID program, noting that they don't have Tawjihi or still studying at the university. Thank you, Nermin, for your question and for your participation.
Yes, and thanks, Nermin. Yes, absolutely. And maybe now it is good to talk about how we should look about work-based learning and what would be the best practices for it. I like what Stefan mentioned, that I don't think we should think about what is the best practice for a work-based learning, because, I mean, maybe we should think more about the principles of reaching a best practice. The idea should be about having this common ground or common agenda between the interest of the employer and the interest of the employees. The interest of the employer of having more competencies towards the need of exact or the exact needs of that employer, the company's needs, the business's needs. And while the employee is having certification for their skills that can make them develop in that business that they are working on currently, or with their future with other businesses or with their career development. So any RPL can be designed, I mean, and this is back to Nermin's question, can be designed for any type of skill. It is just you sometimes, and this is why I was talking about the best practices, sometimes it is not only should be country tailored, but it can be even analyzed for the sector itself. Like what would be the best RPL program for the country itself, for the sector itself, or for the type of businesses. And if Nermin is having those youth who completed or did not complete Tawjihi and still studying at the university, if there is a type of a skill that can be recognized and accredited, this is the way that they should go. And definitely, I mean, even we are very happy to cooperate with them if they need any kind of assistance with that.
Okay, thank you, Thaer. So the next question, I have a question for Haneen on the percentage of female participation and in which sectors. So Wasan again is asking about the percentage of female participation in your programs, in your implemented programs, and some indication on which sectors they were involved in.
Yes, thank you, Wasan, for the question. For our previous project in the ECIB, we are talking about more than 46% of our trainees were females. And for the sectors that they have trained in, actually in ECIB, we tried to explore non-traditional occupations because we need actually to change the stereotype that TVET for females is only for traditional sectors. So what we did actually, we implemented a new and modern training program like graphic designs, mobile maintenance, and also mobile applications. In addition to also a solar panel we included and involved the females in such training courses. So in addition, of course, to the traditional programs, because it's needed in the labor market, we can't exclude them. But what we try to do, we try to open new occupations to be more modern and to be more non-traditional. For our SEPE project, actually the new project, it's called Young Palestine project, we are seeking also to involve more females. So we're talking about 50% of our targeted group to be females. And also we are trying to explore new occupations and traditions. And this is why we have conducted a labor market study in Palestine to see how we can also open new windows and new sectors to be non-traditional for young people and females. So now we have some examples under the ICT to work like freelancers. Also, we have some agriculture relevant occupations and also to focus more on the green and circular economy opportunities. So this is how we involved females in the non-traditional occupations and sectors.
Thank you, Haneen. So the next question is, and I'm waiting for it to appear on the screen. Next question, yeah. So this question is for Thaer. Do you have any plan to validate the RPL in higher education or the community college level? Because now the JNQF accept that. As the Jordan, I don't know what this abbreviation is for, but it's the JNQF in Jordan. So Thaer, please go ahead.
Yes, if I'm not mistaken, I think the JNQF is the Jordanian National Qualification Framework. And I think this is also can be related to what Nermeen from USAID was talking about. And yes, definitely we have an interest. We always have a plan. We wish we have enough funding to tackle these kind of issues. Currently, we are trying to serve the targeted beneficiaries of vulnerable Jordanians and Syrian refugees. And this is why we are going to the skilled and semi-skilled professions under vocational professions. But definitely, this system should be looking at from a national perspective. We need to look at cooperation with the accreditation entities in Jordan to cover all kinds of professions, whether it is vocational or not vocational. And this is why we already started discussing and advocating for that. There is some good efforts in Jordan with making this national qualification framework, and we would like to provide technical assistance for them to reach the targets that they are trying to do. This can bring, and I will try to just describe it briefly since we are talking about experiences. This brings to me the importance of accreditation. And I can tell you quickly an example from Iraq where they have lots of academic and vocational institutions that are dealing with the oil sector. But the oil sector in Iraq is the weakest sector in terms of employment. They are employing less than 1% of the Iraqi labor market. And the key thing behind it, or the main reason behind it, is the accreditation. That these academic institutions and vocational institutions do not provide the accreditation needed for international companies to recruit Iraqis. And this is where, since we are talking about work-based learning, where we want to identify skills with people that can be beyond the normal system in the educational side or in the vocational side, the accreditation is key. And since you are starting a program that we wish you, of course, all of the best in it, I think you should always keep that in mind, that the accreditation is a very major element that would help everybody getting a better job or improve in their career.
Thank you, Mr. Tahir. So next question is for Stefan. In your perspective, how much is important in this stage to have to adopt national framework for WBL? So what is, I think, in your perspective, how much is, what's important maybe? What, like maybe, from my understanding, the question maybe says, what is most important at this stage to be able to adopt a national framework for WBL in Jordan?
That's not that easy to answer. I mean, it depends also on the range of programs you already have in the country. I'm not so familiar with the country, but I know that you, for example, have already a 2-year program for craftsmen, so which is also including quite a substantial component of work-based learning. And you can also look how this program is currently regulated, because there needs to be a regulation, and what can you take for the new program? Do you need new regulations? I give you one example. For example, the rights of the learner when he is at the workplace. That is probably regulated for the craftsman program. Can you have a similar approach also for the new program, or does it need to be different from the regulation for the craftsman program? So there might be overlaps, and you might wish to regulate some of the issues for all of the programs, but most probably you might want to regulate some issues also for each specific program. Definitely you need kind of a legislative framework for each of the programs, and in my presentation I gave a few examples of what needs to be regulated. There are, of course, let's say issues, aspects that are more important than others. For example, health and safety, accreditation of companies, assessment, the rights of the learner when he is in the company. These are very essential issues. And then you have lots of, let's say, concrete problems when it comes to the implementation, to the application of programs. You need to do a matching between students and companies. You know, who is running a database for that? Is that run by a school, or do you have an institution that has a central database? You need to distribute students. Who's taking those decisions? When a student wants to go to a specific company, who takes the final decision? Who is doing that? You need regulation for the company mentors, I guess. What kind of qualification is needed for those mentors? You need probably a kind of a regulation how you organize transport. That is very often an important issue, and if the students don't have the money, for example, to take the bus from home to the company or from the school to the company, a system might already fail. The same with assessment. We have seen many systems failing because assessment was not funded. Assessment of the learners, so that they are assessed and that they also get a certificate. That needs to be regulated, of course, because that's the value on the labor market. So there are issues that are maybe, as I said, maybe more important than others. What I can say, maybe go through these examples and then have a look what could be done by whom. Do you really need new institutions? Because there are already institutions in Jordan. Because it's always difficult to establish new institutions for a new program. So look what is already there, also at the legislation, at work-based learning regulations. Yeah, but we definitely, we recommend to develop a regulation once work-based learning is really becoming prominent in a system. We had that recently in Albania, for example, where we concretely supported the government in developing a work-based learning specifically for work-based learning. Because there were too many open issues and the companies needed to have more, let's say, more security.
Thank you, Stefan. I know that we are going over a little bit over time, but I do have lots of questions on my list coming up. So we'll try to go a little bit over the time of the session, if you allow us. So the next question is also for Stefan. And maybe you've answered this, maybe not. So I'll pose the question again. How could you match the skills needed from the private sector to the trainings, as each private sector has different skills needed?
Okay, so maybe we need to make a distinction here between, let's say, the national level, because usually programs, and that's what I mentioned earlier, is the program design phase. So that is usually done at a national level, and there is usually an institution for that. And that institution is, of course, responsible for also, let's say, if it is not run by employers, to have employers on board. They need to be included in the development of programs. That is fundamental. And of course, that would then also reflect the different needs of different economic sectors. This task can be done by a sector committee, it can be organized by a national agency, even by the ministry, the different options for that. What is key, what is crucial is that employers are included, are involved in the development of the program and also in the development of the assessment criteria, because they know what is needed on the labor market and they need to have a say when it comes to the definition of the assessment criteria. So when those young people, after half a year, take an assessment, the assessment criteria, the employers need to have a say on that. They're not the only ones, because there are also other needs. Those learners need to acquire also soft skills. I learned that from Said when I talked to him about the purpose of the program. So, but the employers are also important, and they are those who potentially employ those graduates.
Thank you, Stefan. Okay, the next question is for Thaer and Haneen together, and it's from our colleague in Belgium now, Laura. So for Thaer and Haneen, Laura is asking if either of you can think of successful non-financial incentives to engage companies in WBL from your experiences. And I think I will emphasize the importance of this question, especially during this time, as many businesses are actually laying off their staff. So how can we, from your experience, what can you share with us on good examples of non-financial incentives?
Haneen, please go ahead.
Ladies first, Haneen.
Yes, okay, thank you. To say frankly, Iman, it is very important question, by the way, because it's considered like a challenge, especially at the beginning when you'd like to introduce a new scheme and approach, and maybe in a context like Palestine, it's also the private sector is facing many problems and the challenges, and maybe especially in Gaza, because also the economic situation is not very good, and businesses are facing many challenges and the problems. So at the beginning, it was not easy to start immediately without having financial incentives, to be honest, in both in West Bank and Gaza. But actually, this was in the first round, in the pilot initiatives and the program we implemented. But when they found the result and how was this type of cooperation and integration between TVET providers and the private sector. And when they participate with TVET providers in the designing the training program itself, and also when they also participate in assessing the trainees and also train them in their workshops and companies, they found and they saw the value adding of such a scheme. So in the second phase, actually, the non-financial incentive for them was to have this type of win-win approach, to be convinced of this approach, because when you're talking about non-financial incentives, they should know that once you gain at the end a competent laborer that will make like a value adding to your company, and it will also increase your profit. This is what the private sector is looking for. And all the time, and especially when we're introducing, for example, providing like some advanced training, technical training for their craftsperson and also to the trainees, and introduce a new technology, if we can say like this, they got convinced. And this is what I think the private sector is looking for. How we can also, because at the end they are looking for the profit. If this is what they are thinking about. So the non-financial incentive could be introducing like a new technology for them by providing a new software, for example, or train their let's say craftspersons who are working with their workshops to introduce it, to be exposure for a new technology. Actually, this is what we can do, and this is from our experience. But to say frankly, at the beginning, the program should integrate both, actually, financial and non-financial incentives, because the private sector and his mentality, they are saying, okay, we don't have time to consume. They didn't imagine that this efforts that will be given from their side, at the end, they will gain to have like those competent laborers that will also enrich their companies. So this is from our experience on the ground.
Haneen, can you tell us a little bit on the financial side? Like what kind, like how do you do the financial support to businesses, just before we move to Thaer?
Yes, actually we don't provide like direct financial support, but actually what we have covered, because again, the training for TVET, it's expensive. It costs money. And when they would like to host those trainees, at least we cover to them the cost of the raw materials that will be used to train those trainees. Also, sometimes if they ask for a specific tool or equipment, also we provide it to them. We pay some incentives for the craftsperson who are working within the companies and should be responsible to train those trainees. This is the three types of the financial support. So here we are not talking about direct financial support. It's like just a financial support to ensure the quality of the training process, in addition to make sure that each trainee will have the opportunity to get the training within the company or the workshops. This is the type of the financial support provided for those enterprises or companies.
Thank you, Haneen. Once again, I hope that you don't mind that we're running a little bit over the session time. Mr. Thaer, you want to answer from your experience also on non-financial incentives?
Yes, and thanks for Laura, actually, because she highlighted with this question a very major challenge, because usually with the financial incentives, it makes it easier to initiate a work-based learning program. And we have done that, actually. I mean, lots of our on-job training programs where we participated directly in the cost of the staff, for example, to help them take the training. It worked, but it did not really work from our experience, let's say, to the limit that we were desiring, because in most of the cases, after finishing the financial incentive, it did not lead to sustainability. And this is why sometimes the non-financial incentives needs to be recognized, because most likely with the non-financial incentives, it would lead to more sustainability to your intervention. There are several ways to show that, and we have done it with higher percentage of success from the financial incentives. One thing here that we bless you, Iman. Once we introduced the advantages of work-based learning, lots of the private sector or lots of the companies that we were dealing with realized the cost savings that they are doing by having this work-based learning. Especially like, for example, if we are giving learning on how to digitalize or how to introduce some digital skills that can make their operation more efficient and with less cost. Another angle for this, which we also realized from other programming that we were using or we were doing, which it is about the employment and the job matching. When we were, during our support to employment, we realized that most of the private sector do not know even what they are asking for, and the applicants to the jobs do not know what their skills are, so they don't know even also what they are applying for, because they were not talking from the same page by referring to the international, for example, job classifications or the Arab job classifications, which it is Jordan is using. And by having a work-based learning program, they will gain two things actually. First, both the employer and the employee would know what they are really looking for in terms of what is according to the skills accreditation, what the employer really needs. Do they really need an electrician or an assistant electrician? Same thing with the employee. He or she would start to know in what level they are and start to know better what kind of a training that would help them to achieve the level that they are applying for. And the work-based learning within that non-financial incentive help both sides to really do the job that it is needed by the company or by the business. And that's the added value that the employer and the employees should look at, and that would lead for more sustainability of the intervention, because usually from our experience, by the financial incentive, when it is finished, usually most of the programs do not sustain in the future.
Okay, so I am just being told that there are several questions still, so we can maybe make it a little bit shorter, and we'll probably take just 2 or 3 more questions, and then any other questions we will definitely forward to the speakers and try to get the answers for you. And once again, sorry for the shortage of time, but this means that this is a very interesting session. I like what you just said, Thaer and Haneen, and I like to link it to the presentation we saw on Sunday, where Dr. Shukran said that this is a win-win-win-win situation for all of the partners involved. So one more question, and I'd like to ask you to be a little bit brief overall. We'll take 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll conclude the session. So to Mr. Stefan, once again, looking at productivity, you mentioned that productivity will be better with longer term programs. The question from Abir is, what is the best way to increase productivity overall of WBL program graduates?
Yeah, I mean, that is, let's say, that's the main point, is the duration of the program. When you take, for example, an apprenticeship program in Switzerland, which lasts for 3.5 years, and the work-based learning component is 80%. So it's 20% in the school, and it's 80% work-based learning. And you can imagine, with longer training, or with a longer duration of training, companies may recover more of their training costs. because the young person, or even the adult, if it's an adult, I mean, there are also apprenticeships for adults, they learn, they acquire the skills, they become more and more productive, and at the end, in the last year, they fully replace a skilled worker. And that is, of course, that is what I mean with productivity, and that is a direct benefit. And as I mentioned, when you have a program like the one that is designed now for Jordan, half a year, you cannot expect a lot of productivity, but you can expect other benefits. Yeah, that for example, the company owner gets familiar with the young person. It might be a future employee, and so on. Last but not least, the school can also help to raise productivity. When the school component is well aligned with the company-based component, when this is well organized, when the quality in the school is good, this of course also raises productivity. And that's very important. We very often, or let's say, government quite often complain and say we cannot do much to get employers on board, to attract them to work-based learning programs. That's only part of the let's say part of the story. Governments can do a lot, and the most important let's say option they have, the most important measure they can take is just improve the school-based component to ensure a good quality in the school program.
Thank you so much, Stefan. And I think we will probably conclude with this last question that is coming up from Dana Mifleh. The question is addressed to Thaer, but I would like to conclude by asking this question to everyone. The information that you provided is probably, the question is whether it is before COVID-19 or after COVID-19. But I would like you to shed some light on, you know, the effect of the pandemic on the results that you achieved already, and how would, you know, that, in your perspective, change in the coming period? So maybe I'll start with Thaer and then take just concluding notes from Haneen and from Stefan on this specific question.
Thanks, Iman, and thanks, Dana, because actually, I mean, she's highlighted a very valid question. And my short version of the answer would be that now what we are talking about can be even more valid and more important when we were before COVID-19. As we all know, and this is not only related to Jordan, but it is related to the whole world. In Jordan, the economy is already shrinking, which means the employment market is going to be less, and the whole economic cake is becoming smaller. This means actually that work-based learning, if it is linked to a very well-designed intervention that can lead for identifying the skills and the competencies of employees, this would increase their chances and ability to stay within a challenging labor market. This will also make the employers in a better position to maintain, at least to maintain their current employment rates, or hopefully expand it. And this is also would give a kind of an opportunity within the COVID-19 context where employers and employees can think creatively and see what kind of work or what kind of learning they need to do now that can maintain their jobs. And this is why I think it is a very timely intervention. It is a very good option to go, because within COVID-19, work-based learning might give the opportunity for the employee to adapt to a new situation, earn new skills, and for the employers to also change the business model or change their strategy on how to maintain their businesses, and work-based learning is a window for that. Thank you.
So, Haneen?
Yani, I have nothing to add more than what Thaer said, but actually, just to say that, yes, COVID-19 actually maybe shows us, let's talk about Palestine, how much we are vulnerable to such, let's say, emergent situation. So COVID-19 actually focused the light more upon the importance how we should focus more on the 21st century skills, and how also to make sure that the laborers and young people and the potential employees should be competent in terms of digital tools and 21st century skills. So yes, I think work-based learning is the best way to make and to have further, let's say, and to encourage a further cooperation between TVET providers and the private sector, because now we are the emergence of those new skills actually requires more, let's say, cooperation between the two sides, the supply and demand, and this will be in a benefit for our young people. And I think, yes, this is maybe the best approach that should be followed within this all complicated situations, mainly related to the COVID-19.
Thank you, Haneen. Thank you, Haneen. Mr. Stefan?
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, work-based learning will continue to be very important. It should be an element in, I would say, more or less all VET programs. What we see now, for example, in Europe, of course, some sectors, some economic sectors are more affected than others. Manufacturing industry is not so much affected, but of course, tourism, entertainment, the entertainment industry, when you think about cinemas, all this is closed. So just to come back, for example, to incentives, it might make sense to develop some targeted incentives for those companies that are currently going through difficult times, so that they can keep their level of involvement in work-based learning programs. Because it is kind of difficult to get them back on board once you lose companies, once they give up providing work placements for learners. So that's what many countries, at least in Europe, do. They introduce specific incentives for some sectors if companies from those sectors continue with hiring apprentices, learners for work placements. And that might be an option also for Jordan, for other countries in the region. But of course, you need to be carefully assess this. As I said, I'm always a little bit skeptical about financial incentives. Companies might get addicted to that, and it might be difficult to later on get rid of them. So these are my final words. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I mean, this has been very insightful. We have started during, in the morning with COVID-19 a little bit, and what we're going through right now, it's something that it's definitely affecting our lives on a daily basis. So I think it's also important to, weigh what we're doing with short-term recovery measures, as well as something that could deal with longer-term economic empowerment once again, or economic recovery. Thank you so much, Mr. Thaer, Shreide, Haneen, Abu Nahle, Stefan. My apologies for those that have sent questions. We still have like 6 or 7 questions on the list, but we promised to forward them and try to get back to those who send their questions in. Thank you very much for the participants who are with us for the second webinar. And once again, I'd like to remind participants that these are a series of webinars. This is the second. There are 2 more left. So please stay tuned for the next 2 sessions. This was supposed to be a 1 full day at a venue, but since we cannot really get together during this difficult time, this has been split into 4 sessions. So to be able to really get all the perspectives together. Please stay in for the next couple of sessions. One is scheduled for Thursday, and the final one is scheduled for next Sunday. Please be with us. We'd be very happy to have you with us during the coming 2 sessions, and to work further with you to really invest to the best possible in youth and vulnerable groups, and to provide opportunities for them to overcome the situation we are facing. Thank you so much, and have a lovely day. See you next time.